in North Carolina, finally. I mean, even though Brown versus Board of Education had happened in 55,
Yes, sir.
54, this was now 1972, and our high school was just integrating, finally. And I became the first president of an integrated high school in Kinston, North Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was the kind of era we were in, and people who had come before me had done the sit-ins and marches and had fought to make the schools when it was separate and equal better. And so our generation came in and we helped to bring the community together, actually, and to lead students into a different way. And I still go back to reunions. That class of mine, it's a different group of folks, black and white folks really beginning to work together at a young age. So we look at the world a lot differently than folks who came before us.
Wow.
And some of their parents, and some of our parents.
So trailblazers, you guys are
Real
trailblazers.
trailblazers. But then I went from the projects and the farms to Stanford University.
How did that happen?
Well, I had a advisor who saw what I was doing. I was doing really well in academics. And I'll tell you this, I was really good in sports. I was great in baseball particularly, but I also played basketball and football. But I did track. But I still remember when I looked around me, I saw there's a few tickets out of here. One is sports, and the main one was the military. And most people were not leaving Kinston. Most people would stay there and stay working in the factories or in the farms there. And I said, well, you know what? I'm not going to do the athletic route. I just made that choice. I was good. Maybe knew that I was never going to be the best, but I knew I was good. And I decided I'm going to stop the athletics. I'm going to focus on academics for the next 2 years. So I was doing really well in school. I was doing everything else, though. I was involved, engaged in the community. But my counselor said, you should apply, to Harvard and Yale. And I said, I'm not going to fit in there. I'm a poor country boy, really, from North Carolina. I'm not going to fit in with these bougie folk. Even if there's people of color there, I'm not going to fit in. And so I didn't want to apply. But she said, well, there's a school called Stanford, because she knew someone out that way. And so she said, why don't you apply there? And I didn't know it was an Ivy League type school, didn't know it. All I knew was in California. And the story of my life was that my mom had disappeared when I was 12 years old. She didn't die. She was suffering from alcoholism, so she just didn't come home one night. Now, flash forward 6 years, we moved from Denver to North Carolina because of that incident, right, to stay with an aunt and uncle. 6 years later, I'm 18, and I'm thinking, I can go to California to go to school. I might be able to see my mom. That's all I was thinking, because my mom was with my grandparents by then. She had come back. So I went to California, went to Stanford. And I was a little bit of a rabble-rouser, I guess you could call it. I mean, I met a lot of folks from all over the world, black folk, white folk, people from all over the world who were doing something. And I still remember a brother from Virginia who hit me to a lot of stuff about black history that I'd never heard before and didn't get taught in North Carolina. And so that's what got me on the spark. It got me moving. And I started something called the Black Media Institute. So this is familiar a little bit to me. Okay. We used to have a weekly radio show. So you were following, we blazed the trail, but you're carrying it to that next level, right? But we were doing a weekly radio show called Black Perspectives. And we did a newspaper called The Real News. And we had a magazine called NIA, means purpose. We had a black yearbook called Imani, spirit. We had a Black Community Services Center, which really stood for Ujima and all of that, right? So we did a lot of great work. In fact, I started the Black Community Services Center while I was at Stanford. That's still there now. Majored in Afro-American Studies and in communications, president of the BSU, worked in East Palo Alto around incorporation. So I got my teeth wet on politics there, got involved later on in a lot of voting rights. The two Jackson campaigns, went to the convention in Atlanta, was a delegate, looking out at that sea of red signs when red didn't mean what it meant in the last 4 years.
I am somebody, right?
I am somebody, and Jesse Jackson and all that. We had the most delegates ever for a black candidate ever at that point in time. And so, anyway, that's my life. And so when I got to be older, I got a master's, and then, so I had 2 BAs at Stanford and a master's, and I started the company with Iris before we even got married. And so we've been friends and partners first, and then we got married in '95, and we have a son. I adopted her son, who's my son now, Dorian, who maybe is even watching tonight. And we really, what's motivated both of us, I think, is wanting to make the community better than when we found it. and understanding our history, knowing that we're on the shoulders of giants. And we have no business complaining about what they didn't do if we don't do it. And I get tired of folks in the civil rights who talk about civil rights movement. Oh, that was a bunch of nonviolence. It wasn't about anything, right? And it's an insult because these people put their lives on the line. You know, in the midst of hate, they chose love, and that love transformed the society. Now, has it fixed everything? Of course not, because there's a lot of hate. And there's a history of that. I'll talk about that in a second, but there's a history in our society that we still have to overcome. But the truth is, we're on the shoulders of giants, and we have an obligation to help the next generations coming up after us, right? To analyze these problems with nuance, not with big flowing, oh, we can't do it, or we better than, those are just words, right? We've got to really analyze what the problems are, right? And then work together like our ancestors have done to keep moving us up that mountain, right? And I'll talk more about that in a second.
Sounds great. So we are here tonight, and again, if you're just joining us, we have Iris and Keith Archuleta, and they are movers and shakers here in Antioch, California. And so we want to say welcome to all of those who are watching, and also those Black elected officials. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. But we are talking tonight about a very, very serious subject. And this subject is dealing with the threat to Black men, the genocide that has been declared on Black men. And so we're going to be talking about some very serious themes. And you may not have known, but at least 1 out of every 4 Black men will see the inside of a prison. There are more Black men in prison in the United States than there are female prisoners on the earth. So we need to talk about some of these things, and we're going to talk about how this threat has manifested itself institutionally tonight. And so we have Iris and Keith Archuleta, and they're going to break some of these things down. So we're going to move to Ms. Archuleta and talk to me about this threat to Black men. Is there a threat to Black men?
There is, but it's not. It is, but it's not the typical. So I just want you to know this is not going to be the typical "we can't," because that's insulting to me.
Gotcha.
What I want to talk really about is issues related to stigma that's placed on African American men, not just by flat-out racist, but also people who consider themselves progressive allies. Anything that is demeaning to African American males, to me, is just as brutal as incarceration. So I'm going to take a slightly different perspective on this.
Sounds
and
great.
I just want everybody to know, I hope there's still time because I didn't know my husband was going to do a dissertation. So I'm going to go ahead now and start. And just so you know, I have a tendency, because I'm a business owner, consultant, but also teach one class at Los Medanos College, Issues Facing African Americans. And so I'm going to sometimes read so that I don't go off on a tangent so that we can finish on time. So
Sounds great.
good. So I'm just going to start can I have the first slide?
Slide 2.
It's slide 2. And slide 2, it just really says that, talks about real learning. And it requires fact-based analysis. It can't just be stereotype. Just can't be word on the street. It's got to be fact-based. Martin Luther King said, education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the truth from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. Now, to me, that particularly because of what we're going to be talking about tonight, that's really important. Want to say here, without fact-based analysis, there's actually really no way that we can really discuss major and little-known facts related to discrimination against Black males. One thing that you're going to find tonight is that the majority of what I'm going to talk about tonight is something I didn't know growing up. It's something I rarely have had a student come into my class, no matter what the age, and understand or know about this stuff. But this stuff is really relevant, and I really want us to get it. So unfortunately, racial and ethnic stigma placed on Black males is still a powerful force, though, in our society now, in our educational institutions, unfortunately, and just general communities at hand. In order to understand the root cause of stigma, though, people have to correct mostly unknown understanding of the underlying reason for groups stigmatizing groups other than their own. See, we really have to talk today or this evening about stigma because, and you'll hear me talk about this a little bit, but it's very, very easy to become an ally, someone who cares so much about those people, when you are not connected to and you are not acknowledging your own past. If people really acknowledge their own history and their own past, as you'll see here, we actually really could have allies. We really could debunk the mythology. We really could fight against what really is a financial hierarchy. The folks that have driven from slave masters until major corporate owners now really have decided the narrative. So I just want to go through this evening. And first, I'll ask a question, and that's whether or not anybody has ever heard of something called stereotype threat, and that would be slide number 4. Dr. Claude Steele is a Dean Emeritus at Stanford Graduate School of Education, and he's a professor of psychology at Stanford University. He is an African-American male, and he's come up with a theory that is now recognized globally as being factual, something called stereotype threat. I'll just read you what that says. Stereotype threat is a situational predicament in which people are or feel themselves to be at risk of conforming to stereotypes about their social group. Since its introduction into the academic literature, stereotype threat has become one of the most widely studied topics in the field of social psychology. Stereotype threat has been shown to reduce performance of individuals who belong to negatively stereotyped groups. If negative stereotypes are present regarding a specific group, group members are likely to become anxious about their performance, which may hinder their ability to perform at their maximum level. Importantly, the individual does not need to subscribe to the stereotype for it to be activated. It is hypothesized that the mechanism through which anxiety induced by activation of stereotype decreases performance is by depleting working memory, especially the phonological aspects of the working memory system. So basically what that's saying is that when we begin to stigmatize, whether we're doing it intentionally or we are just doing it because we have accepted negative references or negative insinuations about our ethnic group, really what's happening is we're falling into this very, very dramatic and also harmful thing called stereotype threat. But there's 2 ways of looking at stereotypes also. I know that as we're talking, I know you're assuming that I'm only talking about people of color and how stereotype threat affects them. But I want you to see something that I really want you to see and understand this, because I think it'll give you a whole different perspective, and I think that it will help you begin to refocus what we need to do in order to reduce discrimination amongst African American males. And I don't think I put up number 5, so let me tell you about something. I don't know if you've ever heard, but there's a gentleman by the name of H.H. Goddard. So H.H. Goddard was an American psychologist who, by 1916, was the director of research at something called the Vineyard Training School for Feeble-Minded Girls and Boys in New Jersey. And that was really helping to shape immigration policy in what was becoming more of a nationalist society here. Typically, when we think about descriptions like that, and particularly when we talk about immigration, we typically think about people of color because both have been negatively impacted in those areas. However, he's important, and knowing about him is really important because by 1919, the United States was really steeped in what we know as post-World War I nationalism, which was really targeted against immigrants, but those immigrants were for Southern and Eastern Europe, as well as, of course, the indigenous folks that have all us and people of color. But I really want you to get this. Back then, H.H. Goddard, when you talk about classifying immigrants, we know how they are classified now. But I want you to know that H.H. Goddard was one of a few famous psychologists and researchers, the other 3 being Binet, Terman, and Yerkes, you probably have heard of them, who helped justify the social and economic classification of Eastern and Southern European immigrants, and of course, indigenous people of color. Goddard is actually responsible for creating a system of categorizing immigrants which denied some entry into the states, and these are what we now call white people, Southern and Eastern Europeans, they weren't called white people yet, entry to the states, and others the right to marry or have children. In other words, beginning to spark the whole thing around eugenics, including encampment and sterilization. I'm gonna bypass some of this just to tell you quickly that actually what I'm going to talk about next are systems that were put in place to marginalize or to subject Eastern and Southern Europeans to something that kept them from rising to the levels or being able to be accepted into this group of what was then called whiteness. Eastern and Southern Europeans were not yet called white. I don't know if I asked for number 8, I don't think so, but I want to talk about Goddard's identification of people that we now label white. I don't know if you know it or not, but post-World War I, immigration, like I said, into the United States was looked upon very poorly towards those who would call themselves white then, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Here's just a little bit of what he said when he was talking about Eastern and Southern Europeans. He classified them 3 ways, things that we say now, we don't know where they originated, but they were actually called idiots, imbeciles, and morons. His justification was, he said that when he thought about those to be classified idiots, imbeciles, and morons, in relation to the upper end, intelligent men, he compared them. And I'm going to talk about how he thought about those groups. And I want you to really remember this. When we talk about this thing now, when we talk about white privilege, I want you to keep all this in mind. So, what he said was that one group were called the morons. He said that many criminals, most alcoholics and prostitutes, and even the ne'er-do-wells who simply don't fit in are called morons. We know what feeble-mindedness is, he said, and we have come to suspect all persons who are incapable of adapting themselves to their environment and living up to the conventions of society or acting sensibly of being feeble-minded. Now, these were actual classifications, and this was the position of wealthy whites. These are the categories set up for Eastern and Southern Europeans. Then he said, we next learned that there are great groups of men, laborers, who are but little above the child, who must be told what to do and shown how to do it, and who, if we would avoid disaster, must not be put into positions where they will have to act upon their own initiatives or their own judgments. He said there are only a few leaders, but most must be followers. So in any way, Goddard is talking about his group, his particular socioeconomic status group, and he's talking about really those that were still called WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. But remember, he's talking about Eastern and Southern Europeans here. Then he said there's the upper end. He said at the upper end, intelligent men rule in comfort and by right. He said, speaking before a group of Princeton undergraduates in 1919, Goddard proclaimed, he said, now the fact is that workmen may have a 10-year intelligence while you have a 20. To demand for him such a home as you enjoy is as absurd as it would be to insist that every laborer should receive a graduate fellowship. How can there be such a thing as social equality with this wide range of mental capacity? Hear what he's saying. This is how he has labeled what we call privileged whites today. I want to show slide 12. Slide 12 is really interesting. I won't go through the whole narrative on that, but this PowerPoint will be available to those who need it afterwards. But I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's called Working Conditions and the Homestead Strike of 1892. If you can see this, this is 1892. This is just an example of the laborers, like I said, that we now call white. We're working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we're paid between $1.40 and $10 an hour. Their Independence Day was the only day or holiday that they had off. Throughout the 1880s, Carnegie Steel Corporation, Big Steel Corporation, was the source of employment for approximately 20% of all males. Now, I want you to understand something. I want you to look at this, the type of working condition that these Eastern and Southern Europeans worked up under. But they were always told, okay, we know things are bad for you. We know these plants are dangerous. We know that they blow up, you catch on fire, that you die, but doggone it, at least you're not one of those. Talking about us, African Americans and other people of color. The whole thing was, okay, but at least you're not one of them. One worker stated, he said, hard, I guess it's hard. I lost 40 pounds the first 3 months I came into the business. It sweats the life out of a man. I often drink too many buckets of water during these 12 hours. The sweat drips through my sleeves and runs down my legs and fills my shoes. But that isn't the worst of it. It's a dog's life. We work 12 hours and sleep and eat 10 more. You can see a man don't have much time for anything else. You can't see your friends or do anything but work. Now, once again, these are people that are now considered at their upper rungs. Okay. I want you to see this, slide 13. These are the conditions for poor whites. These young people, these are children who worked as laborers in these same steel mills. Some of these children were as young as 6 years old. 6 years old. So, let's look at number 14. So imagine, these are the conditions that you've lived in. Late 1800s, early 1900s, you have something happening. Because African Americans were relegated into other areas, weren't able to work in particular places, weren't able to live in particular places, then we decided, okay, fine.
Jim Crow.
This was during Jim Crow. So what we said was, okay, fine. Because they're telling them, okay, we're working these conditions, but we start working them. Okay, fine, we'll go and build our own. There's some rare footage here of something called Black Wall Street. Once again, I'd like for you all to be able to have copies of this because there are links that I'd like for you to see. But Black Wall Street was a small city that was built by African Americans who were segregated against in Tulsa. What's interesting is we talk about now about the other side of the tracks. Well, we were on one side of the tracks, others were on the other side of the tracks, but we were on the better side of the tracks. And that is because we created something called Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street, we had our own banks, we had our own theaters, we had our own stores, we even had our own airport, literally. It's only one plane, but it was our own airport, own doctors, lawyers, the bed, prospering in Black Wall Street.
People owning homes.
People owning homes. There's a young guy here, Patterson Greenfield Automobile, invented an automobile that was being sold there. We were living prosperously. While, like I said, right across the track, you had poor whites who had been relegated to idiots, imbeciles, and morons, and were working in horrible conditions by people, the wealthy. It's always been about wealth hierarchy here. People don't talk about that much. One of the reasons people don't talk about that much is this thing about stereotype threat. See, if we are demeaning people of color, and we are talking about black men and black women and people of color in such a way that we're portrayed as being inferior, of course you don't want anybody to know that we were prospering at the same time that what we call white people now were being classified as idiot, imbeciles, and morons. It's bothersome to me that black males, specifically black males, but black females also, and other people of color, don't know enough about this history. Because if we did, we would stop promoting this mythology that this group of people who have always been superior to us and have always had privilege over us, because that's not true.
Can you provide an example of stereotype threat?
Yeah, stereotype threat. Oh, okay. I'm going to give you an example.
Just give an example.
Okay. I'm going to give you an example because it's funny. This is a funny one. Okay. So I worked one time at a...
Don't say the name because...
Oh, I won't say the name of it, but I worked at a company. And when I went to work at this company, there were these large sales teams, and my job was to manage these different sales teams. And I noticed that in every single team, there were these really high-performing African Americans. But when it came to being promoted, none of them ever were promoted to to team lead. And that really bothered me. So I went to the VP, and I told the VP, I said, you know what, there's a problem with this. So what I need to do is I need to restructure these teams because I need to promote these African Americans who are outproducing some of the whites who are in those groups, who hold those positions. And so she said to me, well, no, you are not going to take, and you're not going to, it's late, I can't talk, promote. So you're not going to promote these African Americans. And I said, but I'm going to. And so she said, well, if you do, I'm going to fire you. I said, well, you're just going to have to fire me. And I went ahead and I promoted those who needed to be promoted. She fired me. We went to court. The case was made that this woman was suffering from stereotype threat. This was an African-American woman who did not want to be associated with those African-Americans. She suffered from stereotype threat, and so for that reason would not promote those that needed to be promoted, and then fired a person who had been brought in.
So this was done by a black person?
Oh, yeah. See,
So you don't have to be necessarily white to be a white supremacist?
No. No. See, stereotype threat is something that's really, really interesting, and that's why I say fact-based analysis is critical, and that's why I give these things and I give ways for you to be able to actually research these things.
Can you give an example of a black
I can give
manager? Give an example of what we see today on too many places, campuses and others, where there's people who are white, who claim they have white privilege.
Exactly.
And why stereotype threat is behind that.
Exactly, exactly. And I run into this, unfortunately, too many times. I have run into educators who literally have decent educations, but they don't have the same level of education that the parents of some of the students at these schools have. I have actually heard professors tell students, African American students, that they should not try to go to Ivy League schools because those are quote unquote white schools. My husband and I have had to take African American, and particularly African American males, to Stanford. First of all, to explain, see that Black Community Services Center? He started all these different things. Look at these deans, look at these social look at the hundreds of black students. And you know what, I'm a grandma, so you know what, I really don't like for brothers to be riding around with their pants hanging down. But you know what, these brilliant brothers at Stanford were doing the same thing. So it had engineers and lawyers, these men are. As a matter of fact, let me just say this real fast, because this ticked me off. And for all of you who I'm talking about, you'll know. But anyway, I posted on Facebook, and I also sent out to a number of people by email this photo of these young African Americans. I think 40 of them are, 60 altogether, but 40 of them are male. I think another 20 were female. These are African American students who are about to graduate from Harvard Law, which, by the way, that's, Thurgood, Charles Houston went there, and these are the brother again. So anyway, but we promote this thing, and we have so-called progressive allies at these schools who don't want these young people to get their hopes up, that they shouldn't even try to go to these schools. That insults me. And so I've had conversations with people. Thank God, though, I've had some young students who would not buy into the stereotype, and we've actually had a chance to take a number of young African-American men and women, and some have actually applied and have gotten into Stanford and other schools. And so, first of all, there is no such thing as a white school. We can go to whatever school we choose to go unless people stop telling us that we can't. Think about Malcolm X. He was going to go to law school. He wanted to go to law school. They told him he couldn't go to law school, and that's how he became who he was. And there's a number of those folks. Like I said, I will go all night, okay? So I won't go into all the different examples, but this is what's happening.
Sounds great.
So if we look at slide number,
Talk about that protest.
yeah, this is the one about the protest, the African American March, 14, I think? 15. If you're looking at this, I'll just say, if you look at this, these are 10,000 African Americans who are marching quietly. Only thing that you could hear were muffled drums, and there were 20,000 onlookers. This is in New York, they're marching. Many of the people of those 20,000 are actually white racists, but they didn't care. 10,000. You know, because we hear this thing, okay, here's the old school of me. We hear this thing that, okay, but y'all didn't start this way back in 1917. These brothers and sisters were marching. Let me tell you. Yeah, and I'm going to tell you now why. Now listen to this. And once again, remember what I said about stereotype threat. Remember what I said about how whites were being categorized, the kind of working conditions that they had. And this was still going on in 1917. So listen about, this is what happened that led up to that march. 1845 through 1849, immigration, and 1892, Carnegie Steelworkers, and pre-post World War I, eugenics. Now remember, while white envy against those who were supposed to be inferior, yet many blacks were doing better. Not to forget Black Wall Street, Patterson and Sons, and other successes after Carnegie and the government's poor treatment of the steel workers and other immigrant workers, laborers. So now, not only, we're not quite at Black Wall Street yet. Another 3-4 years we're into Black Wall Street, but even now, you have African Americans working in steel mills and other places and actually being compensated more, being more skilled. So this caused a lot of pent-up anger and envy, which led to mob violence and lynching of African Americans had grown even more gruesome. In Waco, think about this, in Waco, a mob of 10,000 white Texans attended the May 15, 1916 lynching of a black farmer. His name was Jesse Washington. One year later, on May 22nd, 1917, a black woodcutter, Eli Pearsons, died at the hands of over 5,000 vengeance-seeking whites in Memphis. Both men were burned and mutilated. Their charred body parts were distributed and displayed as souvenirs.
Lord Jesus.
Unfortunately, these incidents were only the beginning, however. So now we find ourselves with issues facing African Americans needing to still be faced. Now, I want you to really get this, because this is, I'm just going to be honest with you. Maybe I'm a little nationalist. I don't try to be, but as an educator and as a mother, by the way, of a brilliant son who, by the way, when he was in elementary school, he went to San Francisco High School during the summers because he was so brilliant that, and he was just a little kid, but he still went to San Francisco University High School during the summers. I have a grandson who had offers to go to Princeton, Yale, or Harvard, either one. These are African American males, and I have a little grandson who's probably going to be smarter than them. But anyway, moving on, once again, the stereotypes, but still, even though this is going on, these poor whites are still being told, but at least you're not one of them. Still seen us as the victim simply because of the color of our skin. So, by noon, on July 28th, several thousand African Americans, we just talked about, had begun to assemble at 59th Street. Crowds gathered along Fifth Avenue. Anxious New York police officers lined the streets, aware of what was about to take place, with clubs ready and prepared for trouble. At approximately 1 p.m., the protest parade commenced. 4 men carrying drums began to slowly, solemnly play. A group of black clergymen and NAACP officials made up the front line. W.E.B. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson marched side by side. At the front, women and children wearing all white gowns symbolized the innocence of African Americans in the face of the nation's guilt. The men bringing up the rear and dressed in dark suits conveyed both a mournful dignity and stern determination to stand for their rights as citizens. And they carried signs and banners shaming America for its treatment of black people. Some read, "Your hands are full of blood." "Thou shalt not kill." "Mothers, do lynchers go to heaven?" Others highlighted the wartime context and the hollowness of America's ideals. It says, "We have fought for the liberty of white Americans in 6 wars. Our reward was East St. Louis. Patriotism and loyalty presuppose protection and liberty." As we go through this, I want you to keep this in mind. I want you to look at this. So you've got this thing going on, and now whites, poor whites, are becoming more obvious. Stereotype threat begins to kick in because they don't want to associate themselves with the poverty and with the type of stigma that's placed on African Americans now, particularly males. So what they begin to do is they begin to deflect, to begin to, well, those people. It went from those people, because they got ours, to killing them, to, well, those people, those poor people. We have to be allies because we have privilege. And and I know that's a popular term right now, but I gotta tell you, when you come out of slavery, and then in the face of all of this that's going on, everything that we're talking about here, and you have people in this country that we're going to talk about now who are living in abject poverty. How many people know about the rural Appalachian mountain states? 7 of them are heavily populated by poor whites. Whites who literally, huge opiate addictions, people literally living in shacks, people undereducated, people without jobs. These are people that need the help of others. These are people that we now call whites. Even Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson, went out and really began to protest and wanted to know, why are people not taking care of these people? But yet right now we're living in this world where people are saying, okay, all whites have privilege. Ask those people if they have privilege.
How come we never hear about Appalachian whites?
I think it's because people don't want us to hear about it. It's stereotype threat. You cannot continue to marginalize and victimize people. You can't if the truth is told. How can I tell you, you poor thing, you shouldn't even think about trying to go to some place like a Stanford or an Ivy League, you poor thing? All that does is stigmatize, and particularly African American males, so they begin to really believe that they can't. But you know what that does? That makes other people that can't, really can't, feel better about themselves because they're classified as white. And it's not fair to those people living in the rural Appalachian Mountains. It is not okay that people are not taking care of them, saying they have white privilege because they're white and they're starving to death and their children aren't being able to be taught. See, this whole thing is run by one thing. It's about economic hierarchy. It's about you keep people separated. You tell people that, well, you know, I might be poor, I might not be promoted like I should, I might not be making as much money as these other people, but still I'm not as bad as they are. And then you look across the street, or you look in some of these companies, you look and you see the African American male down there, the lawyer out of, I'm not talking about these companies, I don't want to give them business, but making $68 million a year. You look at the 9 wealthiest people in this country, and Oprah Winfrey's on the list, but I'm talking about, you look at Mae Jemison, an astronaut, Condoleezza Rice, all these people that come out of these Ivy League schools, but we keep getting told
What we can't do.
that we can't do, and it's
What is the
stigmatizes.
soft bigotry of low expectations? You know, is there a soft bigotry of low expectations?
Absolutely, but then what happens is, that low expectations, then what we do, and what I blame us,
We
is
internalize it,
We internalize that.
and that's stereotype threat.
And that's stereotype threat.
We internalize. We basically play out the narrative that have been placed
Exactly.
on us.
Exactly. So
Okay.
see, you know what? You don't have to take and handcuff somebody to enslave them anymore.
It's
If
here.
you can, right, if you can make them believe that they're less than, it's here. I have this one more thing that I'm gonna shut up because I don't do dissertations like him. But anyway, I'm gonna read this one thing. And this was written by a gentleman, and this was in 2016, writing for the National Review, and speaking about poor whites. This is what he says. This is a white man, Kevin Williams, says, "The truth about these dysfunctional, downscale communities is that they deserve to die. Economically, they are negative assets. Morally, they are indefensible. Forget all your cheap, theatrical Bruce Springsteen crap. Forget your sanctimony about struggling Rust Belt factory towns and your conspiracy theories about the wily Orientals stealing your jobs. The white American underclass is in thrall to a vicious, selfish culture whose main products are misery and used heroin needles. Donald Trump's speech make them feel good. So does Oxycontin, because you know he used to go and tell them, I'm going to take care of you, and he didn't. Analysis on the left has been less gratuitously nasty, but similarly harsh in its insinuation. Several prominent liberals have theorized that what's driving rising mortality and drug and alcohol abuse among white Americans is quite simply despair over the loss of their perch in the country's pecking order. So what's happening, asked Josh Marshall on this Talking Points memo blog in December. He said, let's put this clearly. He said, in wrapping up his analysis of the dismal health data, the stressor at work here is the perceived and real loss of social economic advantage of being white. The barely veiled implication, whichever version you consider, is that the people undergoing these travails deserve relatively little sympathy. that they may be kinda, and this reckoning, had this reckoning coming. Either they are layabouts drenched in self-pity, or they are sad cases consumed with racial status, anxiety, and animus towards the non-whites, passing them on the latter. So I'm going to end there, but I'm just going to ask you, please, people out there, everybody who's out there, if you are the mother or the brother or the sister or the father of an African American, particularly our African American men, stop. Stop buying into this whole victimology thing and tell and show these people, show our young men and women who they really are, and then balance it out. Stop letting people talk to you about white privilege, because that presumes that all whites are privileged. When you go tell those people who deserve better in the rural Appalachian Mountains that they have privilege. This really has to stop. We are destroying our young men and their stigma. And stop it. Stop saying what they can't do and how allies have to not push that on these poor people. Okay? Thank you.
All right, thank you. And so we're going to transition to Mr. Archuleta here. And I know you're going to talk a little bit more about stereotype threat. Go ahead.
Well, I just, there's not a lot to add from what I was to say, but I do want to.
We got about 20 more minutes.
That's good. I want to build on that, because it's so powerful, this understanding, which is that, we're dealing with the consequences of many hundreds of years of oppression.
Okay.
So we start off with not saying that didn't happen. We start off by saying it's still happening in different ways, right? So we don't put that away. So it's kind of like, it's not either or. And I think we get pushed into the bag in our community of either going, look, we need to either uplift our youth and talk about how much possibility they have, but then others will say, well, that's kind of like the Cosby Show, isn't it? It's just the successful family, but what about all the folks living in the projects, right?
That's right.
And then, but on the other hand, our schools, colleges, churches, we don't teach history. We don't teach it. And I think we don't get it. We don't get the truth of our history. And a lot of it's because of the pain of the past. I get it. I grew up I didn't know most of the stuff I learned about black history. I didn't learn in Kinston, North Carolina. I didn't learn it from my teachers or my family. I didn't even know Martin Luther King was doing what he was doing in 1968. When he died is when I first heard of him.
Wow.
Because in the little tobacco town we were in, no activists come through there. No white activists, no black activists. There's a little town called Smithfield where I lived, and it used to have a big old sign saying, "Welcome to Ku Klux Klan country." Whew. And it got burned down. I was in high school, it was still up. This is in the late 60s, early 70s. And I heard somebody burned it down and they built it back up with a metal pole. But by the time I got back for a high school reunion, it had finally been taken down. So it's changing. But that's where we lived. We didn't know about history. So I think because of that, we don't know the truth. And so it's not either or. It's not that we have to always hit people with slavery and Jim Crow and oppression. But it's also not that we should just lift people up. It's both. We got to do both. And I think in this society, we're such an either or. The Western society always compartmentalizes stuff. It's like it's either this or that. And it even teaches us that in our politics. It teaches us that in life. It's either yes or no. Yes or no. And we're now in the technological age.
We know our history didn't start in 1619.
We
know that.
That's right. But then we don't really even know about that because there's so much nuance in our history. For example, I'll just touch on that for a second.
Okay.
In 1619, when the first Africans arrived in the British colonies, the truth is they were not classified as slaves in the colonies. They were slaves coming from Africa because they had been enslaved in Africa, and we can go into that a little bit. And then they were on a Spanish ship that was a slave ship that the Dutch attacked or something happened in the high seas, and they dropped that boat off with the cargo, including the humans, 19 Africans, in Virginia. And Virginia didn't have slavery. British didn't have it. It took 150 years before the colonies reinstituted it and made it into black chattel slavery, which became one of the worst forms of slavery mankind had known. But before that, the world practiced slavery. That's how we had agricultural societies. And guess the first kingdom was in Africa, Kemet. The first agricultural community was in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and then they grew into kingdoms. And if you look at all the kingdom worlds, from about 3000 BC all the way up to 1700 AD, everybody was agricultural,
True.
and they were all kingdoms. Everything was kingdoms. And those of us who are spiritual understand why the language of the New Testament, when we talk about the kingdom of
Come on,
God,
Pastor.
it would have made sense to the people during Jesus' time, because
Okay.
who was in Palestine? The Romans. Who had they taken over from? The Greeks. Who was there before them? The Assyrians, the Babylonians. You can keep going on back. And the first kingdom was Egypt. And in fact, we don't know that. And so we get taught a compartmentalized version of our lives as human beings. And so we do have to understand it is both that we're resilient, we fought oppression, racism, scapegoating, and lies, and despite all of that, we can promote the success of a community that has not just survived, but has changed the world. When you do surveys, African American culture continues to be the top pick when people say, what is the culture from America that influences the world?
So our culture is our greatest export, right? In
It
America,
is.
right?
It's an asset. You know what? Let's take coal.
Okay.
Coal is black.
Yes, it is.
Put a lot of pressure on a piece of coal.
Come on now.
What does it become?
Diamond.
A diamond.
A black diamond.
That's what we are.
I missed that school. I missed teaching
But that's
that.
what, and that is the truth. That's what we are.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's important not to lie to our youth and say that we all came here as kings.
No.
We say that, but that's not true. The kings were the ones in the slave trade. African kings, Arabian kings, European kings, they were sitting in a room going, okay, I'll take 10 of yours, and I'll give you 10 of what I have. That's how it worked initially.
Yeah.
It got warped when the United States became a country, and the French, who had had a revolution, asked Thomas Jefferson, you had a revolution, calling it democracy. You know, we're trying to get rid of our king. You got rid of your king. You want to be a democracy. How come you still have slavery? Yeah. Thomas Jefferson says, I don't know. He was kind of a Donald Trump at the time. He was kind of like, I'm not going to say it out. I might say it to my partners what's really going on, but I'm going to tell you, well, I'm not going to say for sure, but I have a suspicion that these black folk are inferior and God has made them to be enslaved. Now, it's because the pocketbook, Africans had the skills. We had a resistance to malaria.
Yes.
We were in West Africa doing agricultural work, developing agricultural technology that was needed to make this country survive, because it wouldn't have survived if it had just been the British here. They came looking for gold because Spanish had found it in the West. There was no gold in Virginia.
No.
They had to start growing tobacco. And then when cotton came along, when we were a country, that's when it got really hot as far as slavery is concerned. So there is this lasting consequence of, I say it's more like 150 years of slavery, right, in America, although we could say 400 years since the Spanish and others came to the continent, but 150 years in the Americas, and then another 100 years of Jim Crow. And that, to me, and you do other studies, a lot of folks have said slavery was bad, but those first 20, 30 years of Jim Crow, it was worse. Because when you're a slave, you know you're a slave. But when you supposedly were free, now you can't vote. Now they lynch you for looking at somebody in their face.
Come on.
You know? And so that was an intense time. But
So you
survived all that.
go from being an asset as a slave now to a liability
There you go.
after emancipation.
That's right. And that's right. And so then you get we teach about the 13th Amendment. She teaches about it.
Yes.
13th Amendment ended slavery. But the white Southern plan, and see, you have to know the enemy here. And I think that's why I don't like when we just say white people. Which ones are we talking about? Mm-hmm. And if you look at any point in history, you could say there's some people who happen to have white skin who were not for black people. But there's also some people who happen to have white skin who were for not only black people, but people, human beings as a whole, because they knew who they were. They knew we're all connected. We all came from Africa. We all are one humanity. But the folks in the slave states wanted to keep slavery. They lost the war, but evilly. what they were able to do was put into the 13th Amendment this little clause that said, no more slavery except if you commit a crime.
Yes.
So then they started enacting, and I didn't know this before. I just knew there were black codes and Jim Crow. I thought it was just because they hate us and they wanted to keep us down, because we teach things psychologically, and that's the wrong way to teach it. It starts with economics. There's an economic reason. Psychology starts to justify it, and then it seeps into the character of people. But mathematically, they had to keep building up their plantations, and they had to have labor. And these greedy folks don't want to pay nobody. The big folks in the big factories didn't want to pay people the wage. They didn't want to pay people. And guess what? If we can arrest people now under our black codes, Jim Crow laws, you could be walking down the street and look at me funny, you're going to go to jail.
Or you could be an orphan. If you were an orphan,
That was a crime.
It was a crime.
It was a crime.
Yes.
Right? And then they wouldn't hire you, so then you're a vagrant.
It's true.
Right?
Vacancy laws.
So
yeah.
those are all the ways it got trumped up, and then folks are going to jail and working in these fields for a long period of time. So anyway, we teach all of the truth about all of this, and there's a lot of pain in this, but there's also, at the same time, there's the Harlem Renaissance, right?
Yes.
At the same time, there's Black Wall Street, and you know what? There were, I think, at least 9 cities or areas that were called Black Wall Streets. It wasn't just Tulsa.
No, yes.
And Tulsa was one of the few that got burned down. So it's important to teach that happened, but we also need to teach the rest didn't.
We didn't even say that's how Black Wall Street ended, that they did. They got
Speaking of money.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
They
But
really-
I forgot to say that Black Wall Street, angry whites did come and burn it to the ground and shoot
right.
and kill people and the whole bit. But guess what? We rebuilt it.
That's right.
So if you have slide number 3 on what I did, where we start in this country, I know we'll probably have to wrap up pretty soon, but where we have to deal with in this country is something that really hit me. I was studying these human structure. How do we organize? And how did this class system come about? And how did black folks start to be called, inferior and all that stuff? Where did all that come from? The first nation or place to have a kingdom was Egypt. And we look at the pyramid, not just the pyramids they had, but it's the social structure of the society. During agriculture, it was very flat. People had to work together, much more cooperative, much more egalitarian. There was not this hierarchy, even of men over women during that period of time. From the way when we look and study this, it really starts during the kingdom period. And even again, I'll go back to scriptures. A lot of the analogies and stories that get told by the people during that time reflect the hierarchy of the time, even around men and women. And that gets us all in trouble today as we try to figure out relationships in our families and stuff.
True.
But the reality is that's where it comes from. And I have the slide shows this, right? And it's basically at the top, the Pharaoh. The classes below are the ones who protect the Pharaoh, whether it be the spiritual protection or the military protection. Then you got the lords and the who are they called? Maybe they're scribes and merchants in Egypt. In England, they would have been the lords and the folks who get a little bit of land. Because if you're the king, you can't keep all that land and all that labor to yourself, because you got to have loyalty, you have to have soldiers, and you reward people with some land. Right? Because that's how you get wealth. From day one, folks start figuring out if you have land, you have wealth. And that's still the case here. And when you look at that pyramid, that's the pyramid that we inherited after the kingdom period. And it was supposed to be changed when we became a democracy to a little more flat, with some hierarchy, but a lot more sharing of power. That's never happened in the United States. And it's never happened in any country, because what happened at the same time of democracy? The rise of capitalism. Right? I won't go into that in a lot of detail. I have a quote in there from King, but King talked about the fact that capitalism as a world system is a problem. And I'm not dealing with political when we talk about politics. When we talk about politics and capitalism, communism, all that, that's all politics. I'm talking about the economic system and how it works to amass wealth up to the top. And so in this society, and if we can go to another slide before we conclude, about 5 more minutes maybe?
Yeah, that's fine.
I want to go to some economic indicators we have. This is some economic indicators. This is slide 5. We've made we can't do the whole lecture here about economics, but economics is critical. Because as you start to pull away the veil of race, the veil that's gotten put over the eyes of this country and the world around inferior, superior races, which is a mythology. It was made up in the 1800s by false scientists, right? And so these categories, 4 categories, 5 categories, we still think that way. All of us do. All of us say African, Asian, Latino, and white. We all say it. We've been taught to think that way. And we know that in the black community, we aren't that way. We're very diverse. We're probably one of the most, in fact, even on the continent of Africa, genetically, Africans are the most diverse group of people in the world, right? So we carry those genes that all come from Africa, and the good Lord made us to have different kinds of genes so that we can thrive and grow. But we're still all one people. And so the thing is that the system that we've inherited, we can't get into all of it, but the system that we've inherited, when you pull back that veil of race, you start to see what's really going on. It's like Wizard of Oz, right? When the little dog pulls away the curtain and you find out, you think this big, gigantic, powerful thing, it's just a little man with a machine. And what he's using the big voice, I am the great and powerful Oz, right? But really, capitalism is weak because it has to depend on exploitation. And the trick of exploitation is if you can convince people that they're the ones who are going to get the fruits of the exploitation, they will be on your side. And it works in all kinds of capitalist structures, whether it be a gang or it be the United States of America, right? It works the same way. So the point of it is we still, within that, again, within all that oppression and everything, we have made strides since the Civil Rights Movement. So when people say the Civil Rights Movement ended black businesses and we used to do this and we used to do that, it's one of the myths. In 1970, 10% of black families were in the middle class. 38% are in the middle class today. That's still within a bad system, but there's been improvement. In 1967, 1/3 of all black families, 1/3, 34% of black families lived in poverty. Today, 22%, still too many, but a lot of progress has been made, and we have to focus on poverty in the black community. That's the issue. It's not about all black people facing the same struggle. Even the brothers and sisters who get killed more than likely are coming from places that there's a lot of poverty and there's a lot of oppression by the systems in that city, like Ferguson.
So would you say, like a George Floyd, he's not only just killed because of his color, but also his economic condition?
Exactly. Think about what he was doing. He was passing a $20 bill.
Okay.
Donald Trump and his cronies are stealing billions of dollars from the community, and none of them have gone to jail yet, or very few of them. This brother had a $20 bill, whether it was a counterfeit or not, he ends up dead. You know what I'm saying? So that's the problem. And if you look at all the cases, most of these folks, I mean, black folks who live well can be in the same category of, they treat me bad. What was his name? Gates, who does the historian? Henry Gates, Louis Henry Gates. Yeah. Just as Barack was getting elected, some police came to his house and arrested him, right?
Sure.
So, they had a big old deal about it. But, okay, I feel for the brother, but it's not the same thing as if you're living day to day, hand to mouth, and you get stopped by the police, like in Ferguson, for traffic stops and things like that, so the city of Ferguson can make money, right? That's what was prompting a lot of that stuff. So then the other piece is black businesses. Let me go to that.
Yeah, because I think I know we're going to have to bring you back because we have to talk about how to amass black wealth and how we do that in our communities.
We have to. That has to be I believe that the key issue, other than dealing with the urgent issues that come around police brutality or those kind of things, and the vote, those are urgent issues. But the longer term struggle is economic, and King and others, and even Malcolm, were trying to shift us in that direction.
So they were going, so to speak, from civil rights to silver rights.
That's a good one. I like it.
In that regard.
Yeah. And if we go toward economics, it means we have to also challenge the economics of the system we live in, because the way it's designed is not designed for everybody. I need to use this data.
No, I just need 1 minute. I forgot something.
Okay, let me finish this and I'll turn it over to you. So just this one last stat. In 1960, we had 32,000 black businesses. That means in Jim Crow, we were able to still have our own businesses, and we had our own market economy. That's why they were successful, because people couldn't go out of town to go shop. They had to go to your shop.
Okay.
But what we opened up with the Civil Rights Movement is now we have 2.6 million black businesses. It's not a rarity to have a black business. It's just that we don't ever talk about it. And also, but a lot of black businesses are undercapitalized because of the bank structures and things. But still, 2.6 million. And then the last thing is, because I can't get into poverty and all that, I just want to say, which one do you want to do? Go ahead. I'm going to turn it to her. And then if I have a minute, I'll say something else.
That's fine, go ahead.
Okay. So then, two quick things. Most of the poor people in this country are white. Most of the people on food stamps are white, and we got to tell that story and quit being the poster child that Ronald Reagan did for us. Does that mean I don't care about my black brothers and sisters who need social support and services and are not getting them? I have to be an advocate for that. But we got to quit being the ones who make it seem like it's just us, who are struggling, because more people are struggling as well as us. We have allies in that way. And the other piece is there's 4 families in this country who have, what is the data? I gotta find that. Oh yeah, the wealthiest 3 families in the United States own more wealth than 50% of the population. And when you have a system like that, with those on the top getting everything, you love racism. You might not even be racist, and a lot of the biggest business owners and stuff are not racist, and most of them are supporting like changes in voting rights and stuff. They don't have to do anything anymore to create the system. They don't care about racism.
Is racism personal, or is it more just structural and institutional?
It's both.
Okay.
Psychologically, a lot of people walk around with the mental illness of race and racism, meaning they think that they're superior or they think people are inferior. They've been told
this
that.
Myth of white
It's a mental, yeah, but unfortunately they take it out on people physically. Right? Because there's anger, there's emotion tied up. It's resentment. That's the same thing that fueled Black Wall Street being burned, right? That's when you see that kind of, and when the people came to Williamsburg, was it Williamsburg or Charlottesville, and they killed a white girl who was protesting, but they were coming there because they were going to take down the statues and things like, who cares about statues, right? But they get whipped up about symbols, flags, all that. But the real power brokers like the Lindsey Graham and what's his name, McConnell, these are Jim Crow remnants, and we don't see it because it's just all white. But you see it. A lot of us know what's going on. But the point of it is, they're doing everything they can to keep black people from having any kind of power. It's not just psychologically they hate black people. It's just that you look at a lot of counties in the southern states they're in. They've been able to be governor and senator and stuff, but they're not the majority of the population in a lot of counties. But they gerrymander it to keep us from voting. And then now, they can't gerrymander anymore because we're still too much of the population. People moving to Georgia and stuff. What are they doing? They're putting in legislation like the old Jim Crow time to say you can't wait in line to vote. We're not going to vote on Sunday. And if you stand in line to vote, people can't bring you water. I mean, think about it.
The old jelly bean test from Jim Crow.
It's clearly Jim Crow. Let me let her finish, because I could go on and on.
Okay, thank you so much. Keith Archuleta, folks.
Well, he did a dissertation at first, and I did another dissertation. I only had a middle. I just want to say these 2 things real quick.
Okay.
First of all, I ask my students every year, and it'll be in the class. Oh, I'm sorry, I ask within class. So tell me about the businesses that African Americans own. Always. It's always beauty shops, hair shops, and clothing stores. Then I give them the list of all the businesses that we really own and what they are, and the tech firms and the whole bit. It's, and I can't talk about all of them, but all the tech firms. But these are going to be available for people. But I wanted to say this one thing. There is this mythology. Oh, and by the way, one of those richest people in the country, one of them, I think he has like $10 billion or $15 billion, something like that. He's an African who lives here now, who created some type of technology, tech company, but I can give you his name and the whole bit, as well as a sister who's from Africa, who created what we now call the ring system. She's the one, she sold the rights to it for hundreds of millions of dollars.
Every time you use your ring, think a black person.
Now, the last thing I'm going to say, though, is this. I have a video of, and many of you may have heard of him. He's a brother by the name of Kenyatta Liu. Kenyatta was in prison. He was another one of those that wanted to go on to school, was told that he could never be anything, so anyway, he got in trouble. He ended up going to prison. He was on a life sentence. There is a white couple out of Silicon Valley that started this program that where they believed in people. They believed there was something in people that wasn't seen. They had a tech firm. So they started this training program within the prison system. This gentleman, Kenyatta, he was so doggone brilliant, so brilliant, that he actually ended up getting hired they dropped it, reduced the sentence, and then he got out because he had already had credit credit served. And so they hired him at this, become a manager at this tech firm. But now he himself is a multimillionaire. He in the tech industry, and he now reaches out and hires other African American men who go through these training programs within the prison system. This last thing, how do we infuse that type of self-esteem and bring out that kind of brilliance within the prison system so that this man then is shown who he really is, and we can't do it in some of our schools.
Okay.
I'm not, okay, don't get me started.
So definitely, reparations have to be more than just monetary, there's psychological reparations.
Psychological, that's what it
Right?
has to be.
I believe there's healing that has to occur.
Yes.
And the truth will heal. People may not want to hear it, but what we have found is that when people hear the truth about how people have been treated in this country based on class, as well as so-called race, and that so many different groups didn't fit this white thing. And what is white? What is white?
It's a sociological construct.
It's completely a construct, and people who are white don't know who they are. I mean, even as black folks, we at least know we came from we know the truth, we came from the continent of Africa, right? We can do the genealogical studies now to find out where, because genealogical studies can't tell you what race you are. It can tell you what geological place on the planet your genes come from. That's all. And again, we're the most diverse set of genes in Africa. That means people all over the world, when they do their gene test, they get a big surprise. Because most of the time, Africa's going to pop up,
Yes.
right? Because most of our life on the planet was spent in Africa before human migration started to occur,
True.
right? So, yeah, people need to know who they are. So healing has to occur. Truth-telling has to occur, which is when there's racism, we got to call it out. That's why we personally don't like the white privilege thing or the white fragility thing, because see, all those things are popping up now. It's a little bit of a cover. It's a soft cover. It's like, I'm not going to deal with the fact that I'm racist. I don't want to have to even look at if I'm racist or really deal with my the beliefs. I have white privilege. That means I can speak for you because I have this power. And Kuchikchagulia says self-determination. So right there, anytime we hear anybody talking about they want to speak for us, we got to go, there's something wrong with that. You can't speak for me. True. You could speak on my behalf.
But you can't speak for me.
Can't speak for me. And then if I learn how to get out there, you don't even have to be, that's not the goal for you to be speaking on my behalf. The goal is that we walk in solidarity together.
Well,
Right.
I think it was James Evans Sr. that said, how do you know what I know unless you've been where I've been, understand where I'm coming from?
There you go.
Right?
Yeah, we got to walk a little bit in each other's shoes.
A little layman's terms and stuff like that. Dr. Kennedy says in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, that the term racist is not a fixed term.
It's not.
Right? It's not a fixed term. It's not a term that you're going to, it's so, everybody's so afraid of this term. Right? You can be racist in one area and maybe not in this area, but everybody has to do a little self-reflection.
And whites aren't the only racist also. We have racists throughout, just depend. It really, seriously, it depends a lot. But this is what I wish. If we could just do one thing, can we just all get over the, I've got the privilege, you've got that, you poor person, you want, look, there is a tiny percent of people in this country where it is very profitable for them to keep us divided. Can we just all stop tripping? Can we just stop with the, you're this and you're that and this? Why don't we just become people and start to work together, peep the game, stop making the billionaires even wealthier, and stop, because there is no such thing as inferior race, because there is no such thing as race. And you go back, and I'm telling you, seriously, think about it the next time you talk about having privilege and having to help those people of color. Get on a plane and go help those people who are living in the rural Appalachian Mountain states, who are living below poverty, and they deserve better than that. Stereotype threat should not be keeping people from identifying themselves because of the color of their skin with those people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so as we're closing, talk about just 60 seconds, both of you, black resiliency, black resolve. Why is that important? And we're going to close.
Okay.
Black resiliency, black resolve. Why is that? Why is that important? Our primary audience are African American people living in East County, but talk about that. Why is that?
I can just, no, let him go first. I'll go, because I'm a.
Well, I won't do a dissertation this time. I just think it's important to tell the truth. And when you look at the truth of our history, you find we're here. We're here. There's places in the world where there was genocide and whole groups of people don't exist anymore. And yet we'll talk about our oppression as though it's like a badge. You know, our oppression is worse than somebody else's. Well, it was terrible. I mean, look, we don't even have to argue. It is terrible, and it still is terrible. Any place you find oppression, it's terrible. So the resilience that we have has moved us forward. And where does that resilience come from? For many, it's faith, right? It's knowing there's a greater.
Oh, that's another topic we have to
You know
talk
what I'm
about the
saying?
black church.
For many, it's the ancestors and what they went through. For many, it's the children coming after them. So whatever it takes is what I'm going to say. We got to be resilient for each other, and we also have to be resilient to honor those who came. Every time we say, "Oh, nothing's changed," that's like spitting on people before us. We say it so easily. Yes, things have changed, but human beings are still pretty rotten, so there's always going to be some problems.
It's going to be problems.
Right? But we have made it this far, we come this far, right? So resilience is critical.
Or is it okay?
And the
There's a young black man that's looking, and he says, "Miss Archuleta, tell me about black resiliency. Why? Because I'm being told I'm here. Test scores say I'm here. I'm being controlled psychologically through testocracy and all these different things that say that I'm here. I'm there. Why do I keep trying? Why?"
Okay, let me just say this, and I'm gonna try to say this in the right way. We have to stop. Resilience means stop, refuse to hear and buy into the rhetoric. Refuse to be pulled around like little nothings and told you can't do, so I will. Stop allowing it. Stop creating alliances with it. Resiliency means knowing who you are and walking in that. You cannot become resilient at the same time, be dependent upon someone who says that you need them in order to get there. You can't have a both and. And I'll just say this one thing. My grandson, my son, my youngest grandson, I teach them, don't you ever let somebody even imply that they are better than you or that you need them in order to become who you are. Never let somebody, just like those brothers and sisters I was telling about from Harvard. Oh, by the way, I posted that on Facebook. I'm a Facebook friend, forgive me, but I posted on Facebook and I got 3 replies anyway.
Could I say one more quick thing?
Go ahead. Last word.
Data is important to begin to try to analyze a problem, but we're not statistics,
No.
right? And so I want us to stop saying, 1 in 10 or these people are going to go to prison. These people are not going to graduate. These people are going to have health problems, right? Because we do that, and we've been taught to do that. What we have to be able to do is say, the data shows us the work that needs to be done, but it's not a predictor. The data should never have become a predictor. There's a great man who's talked about this, Khalil, I forget his name, but he talks about the fact that data was initially used to categorize us, with like that criminal data. They're arresting all of us, and there's now, black people have a propensity towards crime. It proves the point. So the data should show us what our institutions need to do to change. That's true. We can use it that way, but we have to stop saying that that because of the
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, it has to be, the data may show the danger, but the data can never predict who we're going to be. And that's always a choice we have.
That's right.
Always. Because I went through a lot of data myself. Single mother, alcoholic parents when I had them, abandoned when I was 12, working in tobacco fields in a town that nobody went to college pretty much. So someone could have looked at me and said, he's going to be in prison.
Living in a car.
Yeah.
Living in a car, really, seriously. Drop out, because got kicked out.
Oh, yeah.
Mama, the whole bit.
I think
Yeah, okay. But I ended up graduating #1 in my class in law school.
Well, you just
So-
don't let the conditions. I think Jesse Jackson used to say, you may be
Born in the ghetto,
but the ghetto's not
wasn't
born
born
in
in you. You
Yeah,
can rise
we got to
above.
quit identifying with the conditions that we face as if that's what should define us the rest of our lives. And it doesn't mean we have to hate the hood. We love the people who live there, But if we love each other enough, we want to change the conditions and not make that a cultural thing. It's not a cultural trait
No.
to have rats
No,
and
it is not.
no running water. That's the
Ghetto's
problem
a staple.
of a landlord.
And I'm gonna tell you something else too about kids. Now, let's just be honest, because we are. Kids are kids. So if you're doing this thing, well, don't push them because you know they're these poor kids, they're black, so you can't
shouldn't
really
have to
push
study.
them, they shouldn't have to study. Those are kids. They're gonna say, okay, I ain't studying. Because they're
Exactly.
kids and they don't know. That's getting planted. And then, but what you do is you treat I'm gonna tell you, I'll just say this one thing. Keith and I worked with, this thing that we started, we worked with the first 100 kids that we worked with. Those kids were at average of 1 to 1.5 GPA.
No, they started off at 0.65.
Oh, that's right, 0.65 was the beginning. And I'm gonna tell you something. Every single one of those first, 97 of the first 100 completed. They completed this process with an average 3.5 GPA and all went straight to college. These were the people that, now, what was the difference? Did their brains change? No, the expectation
Somebody believed in
changed.
them. Exactly.
Yes.
We can go on. We can go on. I think that the point was made to teach about black resiliency, the greatness in our DNA, who we are created to be in God's image, and our collective resiliency. Dr. Carol Anderson says in her book, White Rage, what sparks white rage is not just the mere presence of black people, but it is the presence of black resistance, black resolve. It is the Rosa Parks that says, I'm not giving up my seat. That's what sparks white rage. And so we want to continue that. We want to continue this narrative of resistance. And I want you, if you are a young person, middle age or senior, to do research on those slave rebellions and slave revolts and those that just refuse to accept the conditions as they were. We don't hear about them in schools, but study them, because here we're going to change the narrative. And here in Antioch, California, what we're going to do, and all throughout East Contra Costa County, we refuse to go ahead and buy into the narrative that we are less than. So we learned tonight that racism can come in many forms, from the left and the right. I believe it was Chuck D that says, watch the hand when it's coming from the left. I'm not tripping, just watch your step. Can't trust it. On behalf of the East County North Star, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. But I have to, before I get off the air, I want to say happy birthday to my daughter, who is now 9 years old, and Daddy's coming home, and we're going to celebrate your birthday, and we're going to celebrate like it's 1999 tonight. And so happy birthday, sweetheart. Daddy's going to come home. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you guys tune in next time. Go to eastcountynorthstar.com for your latest black news in East Contra Costa County. Until the next time, on behalf of Iris and Keith Archuleta, I am Dr. Lamont Francis. We're wishing you peace, love, and soul. Thank you so much. Take care. Good night.